Anybody else, oftentimes at night, you put the kids to bed. This is our routine, right? We put the kids to bed, and it seems like I run a marathon every night putting the kids to bed, right? You get them all set, and we have 4 now, and it's like crazy. And so we put the first 2 to bed, and we're like, all right, boys, like stay in your room and go to sleep. That's the goal. And then we go out, and then we're getting, our 1-year-old ready and the 7-week, and they're both, one's taking a bottle, the other one wants to steal the bottle, and you're like, no, don't do that. And then you put them in their little PJs, and you go to put them to bed, and your 1-year-old decides that it's a great time to use the crib as a trampoline, and you're like, stop jumping in your bed. But then your 2 boys come out, and they're like, one's like, I'm thirsty, Dad, and the other one's like, I didn't brush my teeth good enough. And I'm like, I brushed your teeth. And it's like this marathon. And then finally, an hour and a half after you started, things finally calm down. Maybe it's just me. But then you sit there and you're like, finally, we can maybe watch a show. And you put on, maybe a show that you're watching, and you look over and your wife is passed out on the couch with the baby already. And you're like, I guess I'm watching basketball now or something. And then you finally get to bed, and I'm a night owl. And so once the show is done, I find myself on this lovely app called YouTube. Anybody else? And then it gets to the point where you're like, how did I get to my 50th video about something that is so pointless in my life? How did I get down into this deep rabbit hole? Anybody? Man, it's bad. And I remember some of the ones that I really enjoy is there was this show that used to be on TV a lot, and now I don't know if it's still on, but some of them just randomly pop up. It's called Undercover Boss. Anybody ever seen that show? Right? Where like the CEO, the owner of the business goes undercover, and it's usually the worst of worst disguises, by the way. No idea how they got away with it. But they put on these fake mustaches and like mullet wigs, and you're like, dude, no. And they go in, and then what they're going to do is they're going to learn how to do the job at their own company from employees that they employ in hopes of never being discovered. But what you shortly discover is on the show is there's 3 types of people, 3 types of employees on the show: the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm not talking about appearances. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And there's the ugly. We're going to start with the ugly first. And these are the people who the company employs, but they treat customers horribly. They are the worst of the worst. You're like, why do you even have a job here, let alone how are you even employable? Right? There's some of them where they're treating the customer so rudely and so poorly that I've seen it where the undercover bosses just totally say, enough is enough. They take off their disguise and they're like, do you know who I am? I own this joint and you are fired. And you're like, wow, that seems really severe. But the reality is that their demeanor is horrible. They're incredibly rude. And flat out honest, they just don't care. They have no desire to be there to serve and to lead well. And they get fired. And then there's the bad. These are usually the people who probably lack some sort of drive. Maybe they're there just to momentarily make it through to the next job opening. They lack maybe training or even vision of what the company could be and should be. And a lot of times as the boss brings them in afterwards and they're sitting down in this nice little private airline hangar, and he sits there and he's talking to them and he's like, hey, I was, your employee, I was so-and-so. What they start to do is they say, let's get you some training. Let's get you some help to become better. And a lot of times the bad, they either get better or they're just like, I'm good, actually. I'll just stick it out, whatever. But there's an opportunity a lot of times. But then there are those that are the good. The good. There's this young girl, she was maybe 20, and she oversaw about 20 other employees, and every shift she would start and she would go down the line of, hey, here's what we're doing today, here's why we're doing it, here's how we're going to accomplish this, and we are a team, so we support each other, we champion each other, we are here for each other. And this young, 20-year-old manager is leading all these other employees, and her team is thriving. Why? because she caught the vision. She understands her duties, but she understands the greater vision. And it's almost as if she has this attitude, this idea that I'm not going to ask you to do something that I'm not willing to do myself, right? Some of the worst jobs you can think of sometimes, right? Like, I would not want to be the person who walks behind a horse at a parade. I just don't want to be that guy. But I know as a leader, if I'm going to ask somebody to be that guy, I should probably also take a shift being that guy. You get me? And those are the good leaders. And a lot of times the CEOs look at them and they say, I applaud you. I champion you. Look at how great you're doing. Look at what you're doing. And they raise them. They elevate them. They bring them out from where they're at and they start to even use them and utilize them in training other leaders. Why? Because they can understand that they're called not just to lead, but also to serve. To serve. And one of my favorite movies, when I start to talk about leadership and ideas of serving and leadership and what does that look like, one of my favorite movies, the movie is Remember the Titans. And if you've ever seen this movie, it's an incredible movie, but there's this one moment in the movie where kind of the two captains, this is a movie about kind of two high schools combining in the middle of segregation, and so now this high school that was all white and a high school that was all black students now come together and they have to figure out how to do life together, particularly football. And the two captains, Gary and Julius, are having this moment and they're talking, they're going about it. You're supposed to be a leader. And Julius, his comment is so powerful. Attitude reflects leadership. Attitude reflects leadership. And as I think about the discipline today that we're talking about, the discipline of serving, my question for us is this, is what is our attitude towards serving? What is our attitude towards serving? And not just serving, but what is our attitude towards serving selflessly as a servant in this world? See, because we're not just talking about serving today. A lot of times in the church when you have this big need, because we need more volunteers, we always need more volunteers, right? And it's always this thing of like, you should serve, you should serve. And I've been at churches long enough. We've done these serving fairs at some of the larger churches I was at where you set up tables and people come and you almost entice them with like candy and little treats of bribery. I mean, snacks or whatever you want to call it. You should serve, you should serve. But can I be honest with you? The more I've dug into this, I've just really felt deeply that I don't know if we're called to serve. And for a lot of us, that probably seems really counter to Jesus. I don't know if Jesus calls us to serve. I think Jesus calls us to be a servant. And I want to be very clear, I think there's a big difference in those two. I don't think we're called to serve. I think Jesus calls us to be a servant in our lives. If you flip over to John 13 with me, this is a text that probably many of us have heard or talked about. We've taught on it and we've used it here, but I want to look at this text today as well. In John 13, this is the chapter where we see kind of the unraveling of the Passover feast. This is where Jesus is the last time he's going to sit down at the table with his closest friends and he's going to break the bread, initiate communion, take the bread as my body, the wine as my blood, and remember me. This is the last time he would sit with his disciples and eat this feast together. As we dive into this text, I want you just to ask yourself the question, and maybe each other the question of what is the attitude of Jesus here? This is what it says in John 13, 1 through 5. So before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that this hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. So Jesus fully knows what is about to happen. He had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. It was time for supper. The devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. So Judas is sitting at the table. The plan to betray him is already in play. And Jesus is sitting still at the table with him. He knew that the Father had given him authority over everything, and that he had come from God and would return to God. So Jesus, he got up from the table, he took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, poured water into a basin, And then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. As John writes this is not a moment where John is sitting here at the table and pulls out his little notebook or his notepad on his iPhone and starts to journal what is happening. This would have been written probably years after the actual event. And so you can go and read this text and understand and look at the precise details that John recounts years after it actually happened. You can hear the anticipation, but also the amazement in John's voice as he writes this. That Jesus would get up off of the table, remove his robe. His outer robe would essentially be like remove his, but I would say almost like remove his shirt and tie it around and get down and start washing the feet. You can hear the actual almost disbelief that Jesus, the Messiah, the light of the world, the maker of all things, God himself, that he would lay aside his clothes of glory to become man in this moment. What if there's much more beauty in this symbolism, though? What if it's not just a simple moment or a simple act? But what if there's beauty in the symbolism here, and it's not just about Jesus necessarily washing the feet totally, but it's also the reality that Jesus laid aside his very glory to be with us, to be here, to serve here, to love us here on earth. And it's much deeper than we've even imagined. What if the symbolism of Jesus removing his outer robe and washing the disciples' feet is a symbolism of him leaving his heavenly throne, stripping himself down to become a man, a baby born in the ghetto, to live and do life here with us? Remember that the next time that Jesus' clothes would be changed would be when he was beaten. The next time that Jesus would have different clothes on would be when he was betrayed and taken to be whipped and beaten into a bloody pulp. And the next time that those clothes were actually removed would be the time that he was stripped naked to hang on a cross. And here Jesus willingly removes his outer robe to wash the feet of his disciples. See, the attitude of servanthood shows us the path to the Father. The attitude of servanthood shows us the path to the Father. It's serving through humility, not any applause. Jesus was fully aware of what's about to happen in these next few hours. It says it right there. The time has come. He knows the time has come to go and be back with the Father. Jesus fully knows what's about to happen. He knows that one of his good friends is going to betray him. He knows that he's going to be taken. He knows he's going to be beaten and betrayed and denied. He knows exactly what's about to happen, but yet, he thinks of everyone else above himself. Remember that in the beginning of this chapter, it says that Jesus has loved them throughout his whole ministry here on earth, and he loves them to the very end. Man, that is a deep love that only comes through humility and serving as a servant, not out of checking a box. This act of service is one that models the heart of a servant. We're going to get to that. We're going to dive into that. It's a model of the servanthood. It's not just serving to serve, but rather serving from the deep heart posture of a servant. Jesus doesn't call us to serve. He calls us to servanthood. And there is a difference. There is a difference. If you continue to read on in verses 12 through 17, this is what it says. So let's get this correct timeline here. So Jesus is washing the disciples' feet. He comes to Simon Peter, and being good old Peter, he opens his big old mouth, right? Oh, no, Jesus, don't do this. And Jesus is like, bro, if I don't do this, Peter, if I don't do this, you don't understand what's about to happen, but you need this. And then what does Peter say? Wash all of me. Here I am. I'm real dirty. And Jesus looks at him and is like, Peter, just stop talking and just let me do what I'm supposed to do. And so after all of that, after Peter opens his mouth, We love Peter because we're all like Peter, right? After washing their feet, this is what it says, verse 12. After washing their feet, he put his robe on again, and he sat down and he asked, do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher, you call me Lord, and you are right, because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and your teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I've given you an example to follow, so do as I have done to you. I tell you the truth that slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sent the message. Now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them. So here's what's so radically intriguing to me. As you look at Jesus and his ministry and his time here on earth, Jesus is asked many different questions, right? He doesn't answer a lot of them. And here Jesus asks the questions, do you know what I just did? Do you understand it? You call me Lord, you call me teacher, and yes, you are correct. That is exactly who I am. But I'm also an example. He's not leaving this moment up for possible interpretation to these 12 young disciples. Because here's the reality for a lot of us, including them, they probably would have missed it. But he's not leaving it up to chance. He's saying, do you understand what I did? More than likely, no. Let me explain it to you like you are 3. Do exactly as I have done. I washed your feet, so now you ought to wash each other's feet. I did. Now you do. Right? He's not leaving it up for chance. In his example, he's saying, my example, not physically, but also in my words and my heart, should be your exact model. It should mark your attitude. It should mark our attitude. And that is this, it's the attitude of servanthood. It reminds us of the path to the Father. Servanthood through humility brings us to the fatherhood, to the Father. And can I just share that this is on display for us at this church? And the reality is many of you guys, many of us probably don't see it. We have people who clean every single week. They don't get the applause. They don't get the shiny lights. They don't get a name on the website. They volunteer their time and their energy to clean, to vacuum, to take out the trash, to scrub a toilet, to put new toilet paper on the rolls and paper towel. That's a servant. We have families who have given up time and energy and even resources to keep our landscaping up to date and looking great. Moving plants around so that it fits and it looks better than what it used to. They're moving and getting plants and they're bringing stuff to a place that it becomes more appealing to the eye. It's a serving attitude. They don't get paid. They don't get the applause. We have also some guys who have stepped in the gap of mowing our weeds, our grass. And it sounds so small and so simple, but here's the truth is that is a big, big gift. I'm standing on the backs right now of volunteers who have stepped in a gap and said, I can help with that. I have giftings, I have opportunity, I have resources and the ability to contribute. I can serve like that. I can be a servant in that. We had people step in yesterday as we're trying to figure out what to do even this morning. If we have to make the call to move from outdoor service to in here, what needs to be done? The top of the stage was not put on. There was no instruments on the stage. We had people step in and help move wood from trailer and back of vans to inside here, to putting them in the right spot so that they could get glued and nailed down, to helping cut and organize. Servants. Not just serving to check a box to get applause, just serving out of the sheer attitude of being a servant. I love how Foster talks about this scene in John 13. Richard Foster, in his book, he talks about it in this way. This way he says, gathered at the Passover feast, the disciples were keenly aware that someone needed to wash each other's feet. The problem was, the only people who washed feet were the very least of these. So there they sat. There they sat, feet caked with dirt, feet caked with dust. Let's call it what it is. There's a good chance feet caked with animal or even human feces. There's a good chance that these feet were the most disgusting thing you could imagine. And there they sat, keenly aware that somebody should do it, but nobody wants to be the least. So there they sat. And they're not going to talk about it. They'll just sit. No one wanted to be considered the least. But then, Jesus gets up from the table, takes a towel and a basin, and he redefines greatness. He's living out servanthood right before their eyes, living out this reality, the call of a way to service, the call of a heart of a servant. If I then, your Lord and your teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. I have given you an example that you should do as I have done for you. What's intriguing is as you continue to read through the Bible, we see the impact, even Paul talks about it in Philippians. The impact of Jesus' heart and his posture. In Philippians chapter 2, 1 through 11, this is what it says. Is there any encouragement from belonging to Christ? Is there any comfort from his love? Any fellowship together in the Spirit? Are your hearts tender and compassionate? Then make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and purpose. Can we pause? Those two verses are like a sermon in and of itself. Am I right? Can we just do this? That's how he starts out with chapter 2 here. Can we just do this? And then he continues on. So don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges, took the humble position of a slave, and was born as a human being. And when he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Therefore, God elevated him to the place of highest honor, gave him the name above all other names, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to glory of God the Father. This poetic hymn almost that Paul writes here reminds us of the attitude in the heart of Jesus Christ. It's a poetic text to encourage Christians and believers to be of the same attitude of Jesus Christ. He encourages us to be of the same mind, the same attitude. It's easy, though, to admire Christ and his posture from a distance. It's much more convenient for me to look at what Jesus did from a distance and applaud it and say, man, he is good. He is such a good God. He loves so good. He's serving so good. He does that really well, but I'm going to stay over here. Because if I do that, that means I have to be uncomfortable. That means I have to get my hands dirty. And I don't want to touch your feet because they're dirty. It's easy for us to admire Christ and his posture from a distance. But God doesn't want us to be at a distance in awe and wonder at what he's done. He wants us to be in awe and wonder and then invite us in and say, you too are called into this. That when we see his mind and his heart, we see how we are called to be intimate with him and imitate him in all things. It's a choice. Do we follow and imitate him, or do we stay at a distance? It's the same mind, the same posture, the same heart. And Paul uses it. A humble servant, a slave. It's serving out of humility, serving out of love. It's not out of applause. It's not out of adoration. There's no applause for the person who gets down, removes their robe, grabs a towel, and starts to wash people's feet. You don't get a tip. You don't get the applause. You don't get your name in the Facebook headlines. You get nothing. It's intriguing, as Jesus declared, both in words and in actions, that spiritual authority was rooted in service to others, not a position. Not a position. Like, Jesus was the ultimate undercover rabbi. He was the ultimate undercover boss. The creator of all things left the heavens, took off his Gucci suit, and came down and put on rags. He was born to a poor family. And what would be considered the ghetto, by the way. And he lived a life, and he learned the trade of his father to be a carpenter. Like, he was the most greatest undercover boss to ever live, to ever walk here. And he modeled exactly what to do through humility and humble servanthood. It's the attitude of a servant in serving. It's never the applause. And this moves us to walk in the true mission in the heart of being his bride as the church. See, the church itself exists first to glorify God through worship and praise, and then to love and bless the world through the mission and service. How are we doing? How are we doing? Because we have to choose. We have to choose. As we close out today, I have kind of two questions as Josh comes up. We have to choose. You can either choose to serve. You can choose to serve. Or you can choose to be a servant. But you have to choose. I have to choose. I can choose to serve. I can choose to still be in charge, if I'm being honest. I can choose to serve, because when I choose to serve, I choose when I serve. I choose how I serve and who I will serve, and what serving will look like. But if I choose to serve, I'm still in charge. I'm still the boss. I'm still comfortable. But if I choose to be a servant, I give up all control over who I serve, what I serve, how I serve, and when I will serve. See, it's easy for us to choose to serve. It's easy for us to choose to serve in life because we get to choose how we will serve. But what's the most comfortable and easiest position I can serve in? We get to choose who we will serve. Who's going to give me the most applause, the most recognition? We even choose when we will serve. You know what? If I serve here, I can only serve once a month, and then I can just do all these other things the 3 other times. And I'll just watch service later. I'll just go to church later. It fits my schedule best. And it doesn't cost me anything. I'm still in charge. Jesus doesn't call us to serve, though. He calls us to servanthood. And that means serving as a servant. It means serving those who won't appreciate you. Maybe even someone who's going to betray you. and one of your closest friends who's going to deny you just a few short hours later. Serving others who are going to run from conflict as you get taken and as you get beaten, and they don't want to watch, so they're going to take off running because it gets too dirty and it gets too hard. But being a servant also means that it's going to get uncomfortable. Like washing the most disgusting part of the body in those times. It's like taking off somebody's shoes who haven't showered in months and washing away all of the dirt and the grime. And at those times we talked about, there is mud, but there is deep dirt and grime and a good chance of animal feces and urine on the feet of somebody. That's uncomfortable, by the way. That stinks, literally. It's also inconvenient. It's inconvenient. Serving as a servant is bleeding out as you go to the Father in prayer, and you're sweating blood because you are praying with everything inside of you. Serving as a servant means being taken and beaten to a pulp, and even right before dying on a cross, not thinking of yourself and your own broken body humanness, but rather everybody else's. Serving as a servant. Serving is convenient. Serving is very convenient. But being a servant, that's the heart of the Father. Rich Vlados, at the end of it all, this is what he says. At the end of it all, Jesus will not say, well done, good and successful servant. He's not even going to say, well done, good and influential servant. Or even, well done, good and high capacity servant. He will say, though, well done, good and faithful servant. Success is being faithful to what God has called us to die to ourselves to follow him, to become a slave to God and serve his will. It's never been about us. It's never been about our castle. It's always been about God's kingdom, about his praises and his glory. Are we serving in the attitude and the heart of a servant? Or are we just simply serving out of applause and adoration from people around us? So where do you need to take the heart and the posture of Jesus? A servant. To serve out of love and not out of selfish praises. And how may God be moving you today to posture yourself and your life as a servant? Would you pray with me? Father, we just come before you. And as we reflect on what your son did in that room on that evening, God, we simply ask that you would move us to a place that we would reflect that. God, that you would strip away any pride, that you would strip away any ego, that you would strip away any false power that we think we may have or may need. And in turn, Lord, give us the posture and the heart of a servant. That we would release control over to you, Lord. Control that we think we have even over to you. Lord, would you radically encounter us here? Would you radically move us to a different place where we can reflect you, reflect your heart, your posture of your son as the servant. And that we would come before you, Lord, with our hands wide open and simply say, whatever you call us to, whatever you're asking us to, Lord, here we are. Use us. Use us. So God, we just ask that you continue to speak, continue to move, continue to disturb us out of our comfort. Move us to a place where we are uncomfortable in your presence, and through your presence, so that we can serve you to the fullest. God, we love you so much. And we just simply pray that you just continue to do what only you can do. We give you all the praise, all the glory, and all the honor. Amen.